Welcome back everybody to another episode of our weekly Moto News Update, where today we'll be looking at the latest industry sales figures, and they aren't particularly good. Another motorcycle company goes into administration, Harleys could be about to get a bit more expensive in Europe, and Husqvarna are looking to claw back some sales. So look, it's tough times in the motorcycle industry at the moment, but KTM all the same are out testing a brand new model anyway. Indian, Kawasaki, CF Moto and Nissan are all working on some new tech. Akrapovic have sorted out one of the big problems with the Yamaha R9, and Aprilia have re-trademarked one of their most famous model names, and so could it be making a comeback? But let's start off with those industry sales figures, which are looking pretty lean, with February 2025 in the UK specifically, according to the MCIA, being down 30% year over year, which I don't think I need to say is a massive drop, and that's off the back of a January that was the worst since 2021. Now, of course, the average biker is perhaps struggling a bit with the cost of living at the moment, and so with bikes being generally a bit of a luxury, it's one item you can cut from the domestic budget if things are looking a bit tight. But also with the stricter Euro 5 plus emissions regulations coming into play at the beginning of this year, dealers had been pre-registering a lot of Euro 5 compliant bikes in December 2024 just so that they could keep them in the showrooms. That means the dealer becomes the first owner of the bike, and so when they do go on to sell it in 2025, well, it's sold as used effectively, and so that means it doesn't need to meet those stricter emissions regulations anymore. So perhaps this big drop is because of so many bikes being registered in December, and those are the ones that are actually being sold now, which wouldn't show up in this data as it's registrations, not sales. All the same though, some of the brand new bikes do seem to be selling well, with Honda's GB350S topping the retro category for the second month in a row, and it's no surprise with it coming in at just under £4,000, so it definitely is a bit of a bargain. The new NT1100 also seems to be going well. That's been the top selling touring bike now for 2 months. And having just finished with one for review, it is easy to see why, as it offers loads of features and touring capabilities, all for a very decent price. Then, despite having one of the worst receptions in recent memory, in terms of the looks anyway, BMW's R1300 GS Adventure is the top of the adventure bikes category, and so either the looks don't really matter that much in such a utilitarian functional part of the market, or maybe it looks better in the flesh than it did in the original promo pics. There's no denying though that it's very tough times out there, and I'm sure I don't need to remind anyone that plenty of motorcycle companies are struggling, with KTM putting themselves into self-administration a few months back, Harley announcing some pretty poor annual results a couple of weeks ago, and Indian discontinuing their FTR lineup to focus on stuff that's more profitable amid these very challenging conditions. Now, perhaps Mutt motorcycles weren't quite operating on the same level, being a relatively small UK-based outfit, but it's still very sad news indeed that they've recently also gone into administration. Now, if you're not familiar, Mutt's lineup was Chinese built, but they put their own retro styling and branding on a wide range of small capacity machines and offered them, I think it's fair to say, a fairly decent price point. According to the administrators though, the company experienced a period of difficult trading due to a decline in market demand. As a result, the business faced significant financial pressures and was unable to secure the necessary funding to continue operating. It's interesting to say though that there's a decline in demand, because if you think of some of the small capacity retros, well, they've been amongst the best-selling bikes over the past couple of years. Royal Enfield recently announced that their Hunter 350, for example, had sold 500,000 units globally since launching a couple of years back, and their 350s are regularly seen in the top-selling slots in that MCIA UK report that we just looked at. Then Triumph, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we looked at their sales figures. They had the best ever year in 2024, certainly in terms of the number of units they've shifted anyway, and that was largely driven by the introduction of their 400 models, so the Speed 400 Roadster and the Scrambler 400X. So yeah, small retros definitely seem to be on the up. But perhaps this increased competition was part of the problem for Mutt, especially given how affordable some of these bikes were, with them all pretty much being produced in India. And so I guess why wouldn't you go for something that's similarly priced but has a big name brand on the tank? And that problem, I guess, would only have gotten worse for Mutt with the Honda GB350S, like I say, selling exceptionally well straight out the blocks, and that looks to continue for the next few months. Now, we have had a lot of talk recently about KTM's struggles, with them slashing bike prices to move their huge backlog of 250,000 bikes, and also offering a 4-year warranty to try and reassure buyers about reliability. But of course, Husqvarna are part of the same group, and so they've got very much the same problems to deal with. They too have offered recently some big discounts. I've seen that firsthand in a local dealer. I saw a Vitpillen 401 brand new for just under £4,000, I think, so that's about 1,500 quid off. And so it's no big surprise that this week they also announced the same 4-year warranty deal, which will now apply to any new Husqvarna's purchase. Specifically though, it's for the Norden 901, the Norden 901 Expedition, the Svartpillen 801 and the Vitpillen 801, all of which are powered by the KTM-designed LC8C parallel twin. Now, I probably don't need to remind you that that's the engine that recently suffered those camshaft issues, which resulted in a massively damaged reputation for KTM in terms of reliability. And so yeah, this 4-year warranty seems to be specifically trying to deal with that reputational issue, whereas all of the single-cylinder street models in the Husqvarna lineup, so the 401s like I just mentioned, well, they'll still just get the existing standard warranty of 2 years, with them being built out in India by Bajaj. Those just mentioned though, the twin-powered bikes, as long as they're serviced by an approved Husky dealer, you'll get the 4 years as long as they were purchased after the 3rd of Feb 2025. And it is also worth adding that it's not limited to the first owner, so if you buy one used, in a few months or years time, as long as you keep up the servicing, you'll still get the benefits of that extended warranty as well. But would it be enough to convince you to buy a new Norden or one of the 801s? Let me know down in the comments below. Now, we've mentioned Harley's poor results recently, but things could be about to get even worse for them after getting caught up in the tariff wars that are currently going back and forth across the globe, it seems. I will definitely refrain from getting involved in the politics of it here, but basically, with the Trump administration putting a 25% tariff on imported aluminium and steel, well, the EU has retaliated with 50% on some American goods, very stereotypical American goods, like whiskey, jeans, and also motorcycles. Now, as you can imagine, I think Harley are going to be the primary manufacturer that's affected by this. And while there is, of course, Indian, it's not the first time we've had any sort of tariff back and forth. And so a few years ago, they actually established a factory in Poland, which builds a lot of their bikes for the European market. So it's going to affect them to a much lesser extent, although still potentially a bit, because I think most of their big, expensive, heavyweight Tourers are still all built in the US. Now, it is worth keeping in mind that while Harley do most of their business within the US, it's still 15% of their sales in Europe. And with those poor results last year, they won't want to jeopardize any part of their business probably. What happens next then? Well, presumably, if these tariffs do remain in place as planned, then I'd thoroughly expect Harley-Davidsons to get more expensive in Europe, and they were already pretty expensive to start with. Or maybe the tariffs will get dropped, as it seems a little bit on and off at the moment. I guess only time will tell on this one. Meanwhile, over at KTM, they seem to be undeterred by their recent financial strife, with a new model being spotted out testing in the past week or two. These spy shots show what looks like a tall sports tourer, but based upon the 990 Duke platform, which I guess could be a follow-up to the 890 SMT. Or perhaps even a smaller 990 sibling to their 1390 Super Duke GT, and so it could equally be titled the 990 Duke GT. So what can we expect from this one if it does finally make it to dealers? Well, the 990 Twin makes between 120 and 130 horses, depending on the state of tune, and the frame is said to be derived from the upcoming 990 Adventure, which was also spied out testing a few months back. It looks like there are electronics running into the the right fork leg too, so perhaps this one could get semi-active suspension, which would certainly suit the versatile nature of an all-rounder like this. And there's also a spot for a radar up front, so perhaps expect adaptive cruise control as an option, and potentially even front collision warnings. No radar at the rear though, as far as I can tell, so maybe it won't come with blind spot warnings and stuff like that. But generally, it does look a bit more touring friendly with the wind protection, and they're testing it with the luggage. It looks like a bigger tank as well, so maybe more on the touring side than something like the SMT. It makes sense as well. This sort of sports tourer in the 800 to 1000cc capacity has been really quite popular recently. With the Yamaha Tracer 9 selling pretty well, you've got the BMW F900XR as well. And also for this year, the introduction of the Triumph Tiger Sport 800. So of course, naturally, if it's a booming part of the market, then KTM will want a slice of the action. And it has to be said, the SMT, which stands for Supermoto Touring, well, it's a bit of an oddball, you know, it's not a full-on tourer, and so it's one of those bikes that sits outside of any of the major mainstream categories of bike. I probably wouldn't be expecting this one anytime soon though, because, you know, KTM recently paused production while they went through that restructuring process and also sought to find some extra funds to keep things going, and also they're trying to get through that backlog of 2024 bikes as well. And so even the bikes that are new for 2025 that have already been announced, like the 990 Duke-R, the 990 RCR sports bike, the 1390 Super Adventure, the 1390 Super Duke GT, well, I believe they won't be on their way for a good few months while things ramp back up. And so this, a 990 Duke GT, well, it's realistically going to be a 2026 bike. But as always, I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments, and whether you think it could compete with some of the best bikes in that category, like the Tracer 9 or the new Tiger Sport. We've got plenty of other developments across the industry though this week, so we'll rattle through them, starting with Indian, who recently announced more tech on their new Power Plus bikes, with their first ever rear-facing radar for blind spot warnings and tailgate warnings. This new patent though shows a system that develops the idea still further, with one forward-facing radar along with the one at the rear, and also 4 cameras, so one at the front, one at the back, and one on either side. Naturally, with a front-facing radar, you'd expect adaptive cruise control, but this one, as you can see from the drawings, has a very narrow field of view, and while it does look a bit counterintuitive, I guess, it's actually by design. You see, what that would allow, as they show again, is using it whilst participating in a group ride, as long as you're in this sort of staggered formation, which of course wouldn't be possible if you had that broad radar that covered the entire lane. On top of that, it looks like it's built to bend a bit too, so it'd still be effective when the bike leans through turns. And so all in, it does look like a rather clever implementation of the adaptive cruise control concept. Meanwhile, Kawasaki might have a bit of a world first on their hands with their Ninja 1100 SX, with it now coming with dash cams fitted as standard, or at least in Japan anyway. Now, on the one hand, you know, this footage could be really useful if it came to an incident or an insurance claim, and also it comes with GPS data as well, so you could use that to prove your location. But on the flip side, you know, that GPS, I guess, could be used to measure your speed, and of course those images, the video, could be damning anyway. And so yeah, you probably better be riding safely and legally if you do have an accident, otherwise your own bike might end up effectively dobbing you in. Also, it doesn't look that clean the way that they've mounted it. I think it could be a bit more integrated. It almost looks like just a third-party system that's been installed. But I think on balance, you know, these dashcam systems aren't cheap. They're a bit of a pain to install anyway, so getting it already fitted as an extra feature as standard probably isn't a bad thing, although hopefully there's the ability to turn it on and off, maybe for those times you don't want to record yourself. Would you buy a bike though with dash cams built in? Leave a comment down below to let me know. Now, did you also know that while CF Moto build these kind of affordable bikes that they sell here in the UK, in China they actually offer a very fancy looking flagship tourer. It's called the 1250 TRG, which admittedly does sound a bit like BMW's tourer, the R1250 RT, but just with a few letters moved around to make it seem like they're not copying. Maybe that's because they are copying. Look at it. It looks basically like a carbon copy of an RT, apart from the fact that it doesn't have the boxer twin with the cylinder heads sticking out at either side. I always say as well though, like CF Moto makes some really nice looking bikes. A good example would be the new 800 MTX, the adventure bike. It looks really cool, better than the KTM equivalent that it's built upon. And so they obviously have some design capabilities, so why they feel the need to directly rip off a competitor, I do not know. Regardless, it does though sound like it could be quite good fun to ride, because while it doesn't have a boxer twin, it does get a 1279cc V-twin, which is derived from KTM's brilliant LC8 V-twin, which you'll find in the likes of the Super Duke. So it probably is a bit of good fun on the road, and also you've got some decent Brembo brakes, a big colour TFT dash, so all round it looks like quite a good bike. Coming soon though, Cycle World report that they've actually got an update for this one with a new reverse feature to make it easier to back it up, I guess, especially when it's fully loaded, as it does come in pretty heavy with a curb weight of 300 kilograms. Now the starter motor for the V-twin sits in the sort of V of the engine, and these designs appear to show an extra set of gears sitting beneath the starter motor, which can be selected with an electronic actuator to put it into reverse. So presumably you could hit a button on the switchgear and it would roll the bike backwards without you having to get off and push it. Now I've tried similar systems on the Goldwing and on the BMW R18s as well, and I've got to say it is quite convenient on these big heavy bikes, and they are hard work to push, especially if you need to go a little bit uphill. So necessary for a big tourer, or do you think when you start having reverse gears you're getting closer to a car than you are a bike? As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Now triples are often touted as some of the best all-rounder engines in the motorcycle market, and largely I'd have to agree. They sound fantastic, they've got bags of mid-range, and you get more torque than an inline 4, but more top end than a twin. So it's no surprise that, CF Moto recently launched a couple of triples with a naked and a sports bike, and they'll go directly head to head with Triumph 660s, just at a slightly lower price point. And even more Chinese competition could be on the way soon, with Chigee Motor recently filing these patents for their own 3-cylinder engine. Now perhaps this one though will be more of concern to Yamaha, because it also shows an automatic gearbox which is similar to the AMT, or automated manual transmission system, which Yamaha offer on their MT-07 parallel twin powered naked, but also the MT-09 triple powered naked, and the Tracer 9, which also gets the same CP3 triple. Basically a pair of electronic actuators take care of the clutch and the gearbox, so you can run it in an automatic mode, so you can just twist and go with the throttle and the bike takes care of the rest. It's perhaps a little more noteworthy in Europe as well, because Chigee Motor are close partners with Benelli, as they already share, their manufacturing and design. And so while there's nothing official on the table yet, I guess we could well see a triple powered automatic Benelli, launched at a motorcycle show sometime soon. Now, we might be getting into the minutiae of motorcycle design here, but these new brakes from Showa and Nissin genuinely look quite interesting to me. One of the things that really affects braking performance, especially under heavy repeated use like on the track, is temperature. And so you'll see quite commonly nowadays on the more premium sporty bikes, things like air cooling ducts that direct cool air round to the brake calipers. What if though you didn't need to divert the air because you just made the fork lowers so narrow that the wind just flowed freely past them, or even put a big hole in the middle? Well, that's exactly what Showa and Nissin are collaborating on, with them actually being part of the same parent group. These designs show an integrated fork lower and caliper with air able to flow freely around them to keep the caliper cool. And this prototype actually shows some, kind of old school looking cooling fins like you get on an air-cooled engine, but this time on the caliper, of course, to increase the surface areas so that the cool air takes greater effect. Sounds great in principle. My only thought, as a sort of practically minded, boring person, is that they look like they'd be a nightmare to clean, especially with brake dust on them. So definitely be prepared to get the toothbrush out on a Sunday morning if you're after the best possible brakes. Now, Yamaha recently launched the long anticipated R9 sports bike, and while I think overall it's a pretty nice looking bike, one fairly ugly feature that it does inherit from the other CP3 triple powered bikes is that underbelly exhaust. It sounds good because it's got the twin exits, so you get stereo triple soundtrack as you're riding along, but I've seen in the comments a lot of people think it looks a bit nasty, and I'd probably agree, it's not a beautiful exhaust design. Thank God for the aftermarket then, and Akropovich are one of the first to get a system out for the R9, and it's got to be said, it's a substantial visual improvement with a beautiful looking titanium build, and also, you know, just having a silencer on the side always looks better. This one comes in 3 versions. There's a full race system which adds a few horsepower and an extra bit of torque, and also you shed a bit of weight as well. Then a street legal system. I don't think you get any performance gains from that, but it's said to sound a bit better. And they also offer now a link pipe for the track version, which does bring the noise down a little bit, perhaps if you're on a track that's got particularly strict noise regulations. No price for these individual packages as of yet, but there is a single option on the Yamaha configurator, and it's close to $2,000 unfortunately, so expect somewhere in that region. We'll wrap up today though with news that Aprilia might be bringing back one of their most famous and much loved models. You see, Ride Apart report that in January in the US, they trademarked the name RSV1000, which I'm sure will stir up some nostalgic feelings for many a sports bike fan out there. It seems like a long shot though that they'd bring out another top spec sports bike to rival their existing RSV4, but Ride Apart do also point out that at the moment it's quite a big gap in terms of price anyway between their existing RS457 and RS660 right up to that flagship 1100 V4. With that Yamaha R9 that we just looked at, the new Ducati Panigale V2 and eventually KTM's 990 RCR due to hit the market, well, it does seem like that class of bike is genuinely on the up. And so perhaps now is the right time for Aprilia to launch maybe sort of a sub-litre V-twin in the same kind of region of, you know, 12 to 14 or 15 grand. Likely? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And in the meantime, I'll put last week's episode on the screen now in case you missed it, in which, I think most excitingly, we looked at the potential for a new CB1000 powered retro from Honda. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle this right here on MOTOBOB. Massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.